Kevin Brennan.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Somebody recently put up a question on Twitter saying, what is the film that best bears watching over and over again, made in Hollywood? And of course, the answer that I gave was Groundhog Day. And sometimes it can feel, when we have these sorts of debates in the House of Commons, a little bit like Groundhog Day, because the same sorts of issues are repeated over and over again. And what's really important is that they generate some raising of awareness, which I think they do contribute to that, but also action from government. And I do hope that the Minister, in listening to today's debate, will take away a lot of the issues that have been raised and try and turn them into some sort of government action, because honourable members have been right to raise a number of issues, including the issue of exclusions, which the Honourable Member Henley raised, and Cleethorpes as well raised in the course of their remarks. And what's disappointing about that is, if you look at the statistics, exclusions were dropping in the noughties of this century, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I can tell you, Madam Deputy Speaker, as an ex-minister, there was a reason why they were dropping, because they were given serious attention at the centre of government. And there was a real grip on bringing down the rate of exclusions, both permanent and temporary exclusions, for all children, including children with autism, at the centre of government. And I think one of the problems, and I understand the reason why the government did it, but one of the problems of atomising our school system by making them more and more independent, and by bringing in accountability measures that can encourage perverse actions sometimes, and unethical actions, in my view, by head teachers, is that it leads to a rise in exclusions, because it is generally better to get somebody out of the way when the Ofsted inspection comes along, as the honourable gentleman said, or to have them excluded from the school if they're going to bring down the GCSE results. And it is unethical to do that, and it's also unethical to do it without there being a system in place for those children to be properly educated elsewhere. So I do appeal to ministers to look very, very carefully at those exclusion statistics and what's happening to them, and to get a grip at them in the centre. Now, it's understandable the focus of most of the debates tend to be around autism, tend to be around how it impacts upon children, and that's completely understandable. But we mustn't forget, and many honourable members haven't forgotten, that autism doesn't cease to be an issue when someone turns 18 and becomes an adult, because many of the services that might be available to children with autism fall away when they become adults. Parents get older, it's often more difficult for them to cope. Adults with autism face a very complex world when they leave full-time education, presumably, hopefully, if they haven't been excluded from full-time education. But the behaviours and traits associated with autism are often poorly understood, misinterpreted, and sometimes even mistaken, as we've heard, for criminality. And one of the key problems is the difficulty ensuring that services are joined up across government, from the Department of Health and Social Care, the Ministry of Justice, the Attorney General Office, the Home Office, the Department for Work and Pensions, and the Department for Education. And we had a debate, Madam Deputy Speaker, on the 30th of January in Westminster Hall on this very subject, and it was actually suggested by an honourable member opposite, and I thought it was a very good suggestion, that the government, with Cabinet Office oversight, should create something like the Covenant and Veterans Board to ensure that every department has somebody absolutely focused on the issue of autism and its impact upon families. And in my experience as a former minister, to get departments working together and to make progress, you have to get ministers involved. And ministers have to be brought together, not just officials. It's possible to make really significant change by ensuring that there's ministerial leadership and that ministers are brought together across government to bring about change. And what I'd like to say to the Minister today, when she responds to the debate, is, I think in recent debates I've been participating, she's about the third minister who will have responded to debates on autism, and I do hope that she'll go away and talk to those other ministers and make sure that they're thinking about how they can work together to bring government policy together in relation to how we tackle the issues around autism, and take seriously that suggestion which was made by one of members on her side of the House during the recent debate, that they should bring together a board or a working group of ministers across government from different departments to try and tackle some of these issues cross-departmentally with ministerial leadership. Now, when I spoke in that Westminster Hall, Madam Deputy Speaker, at the end of January, I focused on how adults with autism are affected by the criminal justice system, and that was mentioned by the Right Honourable Lady who chairs the All-Party Parliamentary Group, and I welcome very much her call for evidence to the All-Party Parliamentary Group, which she made during the course of her remarks. And I do encourage other honourable members to do so, and I certainly will encourage my constituents and will do so myself to participate in that, because it's really important to understand, and it often isn't understood, that some of the behaviours associated with autism, such as stimming, for example, which is the repetitive physical movement that helps reinstate a sense of calm for people with autism, is often misunderstood. And particularly, as was the case in relation to a constituent of mine, when in crowded public spaces or travelling on public transport. When adults on the autistic spectrum come under suspicion of criminal behaviour, then safeguarding becomes absolutely crucial. And in the Westminster Hall debate that we had, I referred to that case, and that the safeguards in the criminal justice system did not protect him as they should have done under current policy and practice, because his stimming was misinterpreted whilst travelling in crowded conditions on public transport, and that led to his arrest. So I want to appeal to the government to look at this issue in particular as well, how adults with autism, what happens to them when they come into contact with the criminal justice system, and to find ways to make sure that police are properly trained, yes, British Transport Police in particular are properly trained, but that all services know how to deal with people, autistic people, when they are arrested. So I would conclude just to say, Madam Deputy Speaker, I hope ministers will consider setting up that joint group. I don't expect the minister to be able to commit to that today, but I hope she can commit to taking the idea away and considering it further with ministers and reporting back to the House at an appropriate time, so that our debates don't just become Groundhog Day.